Yeah, my name is Maria Zwicker. I also come from the University of Amsterdam, and I'm going to present a series of studies in a manuscript that just got accepted to be published at the Journal of Sustainability earlier this week. So that's nice. So if you look around you, even your home office, you'll see lots of things that are at least partially made from plastic or entirely made from plastic. And as you probably know, plastic has lots of kind of negative consequences as well. For example, for the environment, I think we've seen ocean pollution pictures a lot over the last couple of years, but it also contributes to global warming through the large amount of CO2 that's emitted throughout the whole life cycle of plastic. And while I don't think it's very realistic to suddenly stop using plastic, one possible solution to this kind of plastic problem is to switch to more sustainable plastics. One option for which is bio-based plastic. And basically what bio-based plastic is, it's very similar in appearance and functionality to conventional plastic. But rather than being made from fossil feedstocks, such as oil, coal, and natural gases, which is what conventional plastic is usually made of, it's made from biological renewable resources, also called biomass. And what makes that more sustainable is that it doesn't add any additional CO2 to the atmosphere, so it doesn't contribute to global warming. And that's because biomass is kind of harvested, I guess, from the surface of the Earth rather than from underneath it. So the natural carbon cycle is already designed to be able to deal with it. So for these kind of new sustainable technologies to actually take off on the market and be widely available, we need consumers to be demanding those kind of products, and also for them to be willing to at least initially pay a little bit more, because in the beginning the production process is just not as big. And because attitudes and beliefs, whether they're accurate or inaccurate, have a large influence on actual behavior, that's what I looked at in a series of 4 studies. So I looked at attitudes and other kind of perceptions and beliefs that people have towards bio-based plastics and also conventional plastics. And I'm going to talk you quickly through a series of 4 studies, which were all run on prolific academic, on Western samples. I think study 3 was only UK participants, but Western samples in general. So in all 4 studies, we measured attitudes, and we measured it separately we measured the positive aspects of people's attitude separately to the negative aspects, because as Shiva already mentioned in his talk, people can feel ambivalent about certain topics. For example, if I think about plastic, well, I find it very useful. I do use it a lot. I think we've gained quite a lot from it. But I also feel kind of guilty because I know how much problem it creates. So that's why we measured both aspects. And these are the results for the 4 studies. And you can see conventional plastic attitudes in dark gray and the bio-based attitudes in light gray. And you can see that people's attitudes towards conventional plastic were always more negative and less positive compared to attitudes towards bio-based plastic, which tended to be more positive than negative. So overall, in these 4 studies, we found that people generally feel more positive and also less negative towards bio-based plastic than towards conventional plastic, which I think is quite encouraging. And then we also measured willingness to pay, because in the end, if it does hit the market, you do need to have people willing to buy the products. And one measure that we used was a very simple bottle measure. So we showed participants a picture of a simple plastic water bottle made from conventional plastic that cost, let's say, €1 or £1 in study 3. And we asked them how much they would be willing to pay for the same bottle if it was made from bio-based plastic. And throughout the 3 studies that we measured it in, we found that participants said that they would be willing to pay more for bio-based plastic than conventional plastic. That was always the case. And I ran a couple of studies afterwards and found the same pattern, which I think is also very encouraging. But we also found that when we asked participants how important they thought it was to recycle both conventional and bio-based plastic, we found that they didn't find it to be as important to recycle bio-based plastic. As a surprising side note, it is actually important to recycle bio-based plastic, otherwise you end up with the same mess in the ocean. In study 4, we also found that this effect was mainly driven by people thinking that bio-based plastic is necessarily biodegradable, which is not necessarily the case. You have different plastic types for different functions. It's the same as with conventional plastic. Yeah, we found that many people, the majority of people, thought that it was that bio-based plastic was necessarily biodegradable. So there was lots of misconceptions about this. And we also found that generally people don't really know much about bio-based plastic. On the right here, you can see a self-reported knowledge prior to our studies, and that's quite low. And that already incorporates those people who think that they know bio-based plastic is biodegradable, which it not necessarily is. All of this was quite correlational. So in our 4th study, we randomly assigned people to 3 different conditions in which we varied the amount of information that participants got about bio-based plastic and its properties. So in the control condition, which served as a kind of baseline, participants read that bio-based plastic is entirely or partially made from biomass, and it's very similar in its appearance and function to conventional plastic. And that's what we'd used in the previous studies. And we expected, like in the previous studies, that that would lead to misconceptions about its biodegradability. Also, not much knowledge about the actual benefits of it, but a very positive attitude. In the negative condition, we gave them the same information, but we also wanted to remove the biodegradability misconception. So we told them that it is not necessarily biodegradable. So we expected them to not have that misconception anymore, still not to know much about the CO2 advantage, and have a more negative consequence, a more negative attitude, because you take away the one redeeming factor. And then in the third condition, we gave them the same information as in the negative condition, but we added kind of the real benefit of bio-based plastic, which is the smaller CO2 footprint, telling them exactly why it's more sustainable. So there we expected just bigger, greater levels of knowledge. So no misconceptions about biodegradability, no knowledge about the benefit of the CO2 emissions, and a somewhat kind of little bit more positive attitude somewhere between the control and negative condition. And our manipulation worked beautifully. That's exactly what we found. So that was nice. There's also graphs here, but I don't think I have time to go into that. And we also wanted to see how that manipulation would affect our behavioral variable. So in this case, it was willingness to pay. And in general, we found that, like in the previous studies, people were always willing to pay more for bio-based plastic than conventional plastic. But if you have a look in the negative condition, that's where people didn't have the misconception anymore, but we didn't tell them the benefit, the additional benefit. That's where participants were willing to pay the least. But what's also interesting is in the balanced condition, where participants also didn't have the misconception, but they got the additional information of why it's better, why it's more sustainable. The amount that they're willing to pay rose back up to the control level. So overall, we found that participants had very positive attitudes towards bio-based plastic across the board. We also found that they were willing to pay more for it. However, they did have misconceptions about how biodegradable bio-based plastic is, and they thought it less important to recycle bio-based plastic compared to conventional plastics. I think in order to transition to a more sustainable kind of economy when it comes to plastic, 2 things need to happen. One, well, these companies need to sell more sustainable options, otherwise you can't really choose from them. But you also need that demand from the consumer and the willingness to at least initially pay a little bit more. And in our study, we found that the positive attitudes towards bio-based plastic is there. So is the willingness to pay more. But consumers are lacking the kind of knowledge about bio-based plastics. leading to misconceptions, for example. But we found in our final study that if we do give participant or consumers information about the properties and actual benefits of bio-based plastic and dispel those misconceptions, they do remain positive and are willing to pay a price premium. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Maria. You actually still have 5 minutes left, so if you want to go back to the plots you want to show, feel free to do that. Otherwise, we can also jump to questions.
We can see if there's questions first, and then if I still have time, or if there's a question about the plots, I can go back.
Okay. So anyone who has a question, you can use the Zoom functionality to raise your hand.
That means my talk was either very clear or very boring.
The first one.
Thanks.
I think it's a highly relevant and interesting topic.
No, thank you. I can talk a little bit more about bio-based plastic not necessarily being biodegradable. It's because, like, if you look at conventional plastics, it really depends on the function that you want that plastic to fulfill. So, for example, if you're building a car or a spaceship or a medical equipment, you don't want your plastic to be biodegradable for quality reasons and stuff like that. While on some other like for packaging and all the kind of single-use plastic things that end up in the oceans, there it might be more desirable to have bio-based plastic that's biodegradable. But there's often a confusion when it comes to, or when it comes to normal consumers, that they don't know what means what, because the term bioplastic has been thrown around a lot, and bioplastic can just refer to either plastic that is made from biomass or plastic that is just made from conventional plastic but is biodegradable, or a mixture of those. So that's where a lot of kind of misconceptions come in, which, well, in some instances they can seem kind of positive because, oh great, people are willing to pay more, they're very positive towards it. But if it then ends up with people thinking, well, I can just litter it, will just take care of itself, or something like that, or we work together with Lego, for example, and they want to be more sustainable with their with the plastic that they make their bricks out of, and they have a reputation for being, well, very qualitatively very good. And if then people think, oh, now my Lego bricks will biodegrade, that's not good. So it's a kind of distinction that is sometimes a bit lost in communication.
So how much % plastic do you think we can, so if I look at my everyday consumption of plastic, how much % do you think biodegradable can replace, if you say for some things you just simply cannot use them?
Well, ideally you'd want to replace most of it. Some should be biodegradable, others doesn't have to be. If you're reusing something, you don't want it to be biodegradable. You just want to reuse, and reuse is always better than recycling. So that's good. And I mean, just the conventional plastic that now makes up like 98% of the plastic that we use, it's made from fossil fuels. So that creates a whole lot of tension, not only environmentally, but also there's been wars fought over who gets the oil. And if we have a look at the kind of Paris climate agreement, the amount of CO2 that plastic alone emits, if plastic production keeps growing like it is at the moment, then most of our carbon budget is going to be taken up by just plastic. So if you can replace that with something that doesn't actually add any additional CO2, then I think that's quite a big step.
Definitely.